What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Gonna learn a bit about the Swedish Empire, a little bit of Sweden history. So y'all make sure y'all hit that subscribe button, send down those recommendations, and let's jump into it.
Was made possible by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, online store, or website, make it with Squarespace. For much of Scandinavian history, the balance of power has been maintained by just four states: Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and the less obvious one, Russia. But only Sweden was able to form an empire and tightly control the entire region for almost a century. This raises the question, how was Sweden able to consolidate its hold in Scandinavia and triumph against its neighbors, namely Denmark, which at one point loosely controlled Sweden, Norway, and parts of Finland? In order to understand Sweden's ascent to empire status, we need to travel back to the end of the 14th century, when Sweden, along with Norway, were ruled by the King of Denmark, in what was known as the Kalmar Union. It would take more than a century for the Swedes under King Gustav I Vasa to successfully break away from Danish rule in 1523. Approximately 3 years later, Gustav I embraced Protestantism, but it's not because he wanted to get rid of his wife, rather he needed funding for his emergent kingdom. After waging one costly war after the next in opposition to Denmark, Gustav needed an answer to the question of mounting debt. Lutheranism provided a convenient and somewhat Viking solution, as it precipitated the confiscation of church properties and gave him access to an unprecedented source of funds. With his economic situation improving, Gustav would need to likewise improve his military if he wanted to fulfill his grand ambition to control the Baltic Rim, and taking money from Swedish churches proved to be an unsustainable source of income. These problems were solved by the development of the merchant class and the capture of Russian ports. By the middle of the 16th century, the Swedish military and the Swedish population as a whole needed a leader that would inspire and provide the military with a vision to fulfill. As you may have guessed from the thumbnail of our video, this leader was none other than Gustavus Adolphus the Great, who had near single-handedly...
Gustavus, so they had two Gustavus kings? But he is right though, like, especially when it comes to war and what a team need, what a a nation need type thing. You need a good leader that see a vision and that can put people in the right position to make that dream come to reality.
This leader was none other than Gustavus Adolphus the Great, who had near single-handedly transformed Sweden into an empire. Born in 1594, Gustavus, or as he was known in Swedish, King Gustav II Adolf, inherited the Swedish throne at only 16. At an age when most of us are concerned about getting a driver's license, Gustavus had to worry about 3 ongoing wars he inherited against Denmark, Poland, and Russia.
That's a big responsibility for a 16-year-old, but I feel like even back in those days, like, you were required to do so much as a youngin, I feel like nowadays, like, these young kids, they don't be wanting to do too much nowadays. Like, I don't know, the hard work definitely is slowly drifting away from some of it. I can't say everybody, but some, the hard work, you can see hard work drifting away out of like young kids nowadays. It's crazy.
There was no limit to Gustavus's courage. He often directed his troops on the front line, disregarding his own safety. And thanks to the example he set and his emphasis on instilling discipline in his troops, Gustavus found success in 2 of the 3 wars he inherited. Even before the aforementioned conflicts were over, he had involved Sweden in one of the bloodiest wars in European history, the 30 Years' War. This massive conflict was the result of religious disputes in the Holy Roman Empire between Protestants and Catholics, and in 1630, Sweden joined the side of the Protestants, inflating what was originally a widespread religious revolt into a complete European total war. Before we examine Sweden's success in the 30 Years' War, we must first understand Gustavus's military innovations. As we described in our video, Why Did Soldiers Fight in Lines?, European armies during the early modern era were deployed in squares of pikemen and musketeers until the widespread adoption of linear tactics.
I always wondered that too, because that would be so. I mean, that of course they trained and stuff like that, but that seemed like it would be hard to kind of shoot when you in a line, so you wouldn't shoot your, the person on your side.
A system developed by Maurice of Nassau. While Maurice's linear system was more effective than the pike square which preceded it, it was not perfect. Gustavus would fine-tune this method, and his model would remain in use until the French Revolution, almost entirely unchanged. Gustavus's reforms did not stop there. He improved logistics systems, developing the general staff, reorganizing cavalry units, and professionalizing artillery. These reforms, along with his martial ability, would bring him repeated victories in the 30 Years' War. So many, in fact, that Napoleon considered him one of the greatest generals in history. Gustavus himself commanded the Swedes successfully at several battles during the war, most notably at Breitenfeld in 1631 and Lutzen in 1632, wow. The latter of which resulted...
I mean, my guy, he definitely got to be a legend, because to be able to lead at 16, the future was only going to get brighter, if you could do it at 16... Hey,
resulted in his death. Even with Gustavus gone, however, the Swedish army continued to be successful on the battlefield, and in 1655, when the 30 Years' War ended, the Kingdom of Sweden controlled several small German states. After the death of Gustavus, Sweden was in a precarious position due to the incompetence of Gustavus's successors, Christina and Charles X, Gustav. Despite their ineffectiveness, the Swedish military was still effective, and in the 1650s, Sweden would again go on to win victories against its rivals, Poland, Denmark, and Russia. But as the 18th century drew nearer, Sweden's military dominance in Northern Europe and Eastern Europe would begin to decline, just as many European nations adopted Swedish military tactics. This ultimately eliminated Sweden's long-standing martial advantage. Although Sweden did participate in more limited conflicts during the reign of Charles XI, who held the throne during the later...
I always think that's a tough situation when you're so successful at something and people start basically doing what you do back. So it's almost hard to, it's almost hard to win when other people know your next move type thing. And that's so different to me, because I feel like that still happens even today. Of course, you can see with sports and stuff and life in general, you know what I'm saying? Like, people start learning, seeing how you do things, then they start doing it, then they can just add like their own little twist to it, and that's how they win.
Parts of the 17th century, most of the king's energy during this time was spent on reforming the bureaucracy and nobility of the country. Charles XI's most notable accomplishment was his conversion of the Swedish government from a semi-parliamentary state to a near-absolute monarchy, which allowed him to reform the country's budgetary process and thus provide more funds for future wars. Charles XI died at the age of 41, leaving his 15-year-old son, Charles XII, as king, and it was at this point where Sweden would never fully recover. A mere 3 years after Charles XII was crowned, the enemies of Sweden, including Russia and Poland, decided to take advantage of the king's inexperience and declared war. This conflict, which would be known as the Great Northern War, would last over 20 years. Sweden was initially successful in the war, but the tide turned quickly after the disastrous Battle of Poltava, which resulted in the capture of almost the entire Swedish army. To add insult to injury, the Danish decided to make several incursions into Swedish territory. It was while fighting the Danes that Charles himself was killed in battle in 1718, approximately a decade after Poltava. The Great Northern War continued until 1721, but the Swedes saw no further successes. When the war ended, Sweden had lost Ingria, Estonia, and Livonia to the Russians, and several small Scandinavian territories to the Danes. And it was in that year, 1721, that marked the end of the Swedish Empire. Sweden would continue to play a role in European affairs throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, but its role would remain a minor one due to continued defeat at the hands of its neighbors. By the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Sweden took a stance of neutrality, which persisted during both of the world wars.
Dang. That's pretty tough,
Now back.
though. That's pretty tough, but you can't tell Gustav, but Charles, what was it, Charles the Third? That's that's a big responsibility, and he was even younger, being 15. I have to take on that role, so of course, like he should. I'm pretty sure he had other people that have been there, done that, and is here helping him and guiding him though. But that's a big role at 15.
To our
Man.
sponsor. Recently, Squarespace has made my life align templates. Point if you really
Sorry,
mind cool Squarespace getting started. First website, team, and my general staff on Patreon. We just hit a new goal
that was
recently.
it anyway. But yeah, man. Hey, Gustav, definitely a legend. Led the 30-year war, and led at 16. Like, I think people don't understand. Like, as a youngin, in your teen years, you can still like, especially if I feel like if you listen to the right people, get some wisdom, get some knowledge, there's a lot you can do at a young age. And most people think, oh, you're a teenager, oh, you're gonna mess up, blah, blah. That's not always the case. You don't always have to. Sometimes people can use that as a excuse. Oh, they're young. That's what, at the end of the day, it's just about who you listen to, getting the wisdom, getting the knowledge, getting the right information to do what you need to do. Like, not everybody when they're a teenager just messes up, and we can't just expect them to mess up just because they're young. There's big responsibilities on all of us. It's just if we choose to do whatever it is. But man, that was definitely good. Swedish, hey, had a lot of wars, which everybody did back in those days. But I feel like as time progressed, they lost a lot too. Lost a lot of land and stuff. And like you said, that was the end of the Swedish Empire. My guy did a good job telling us, the armchair historian. So y'all let me know if it's fact or cap. This is new to me, so y'all gotta give me some more information. But that's all I have. Y'all hit that subscribe button, send down those recommendations, and y'all be blessed, be the best, and be you. I'm out.